All right, good morning. My name is Kelli Roemer. I am a social scientist with the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. I just want to first say thank you for being here today and for sharing your honest feedback and your experience. We are taking it very seriously and are grateful for the time you took out of your day away from your responsibilities, maybe away from your jobs, to come and participate in these conversations. I can't promise to be as charismatic as our friends from Louisiana, but I promise to do my best to be heard. So if I am talking too fast or step away from the mic, please, James will wave at me and make sure that I'm here. So we just heard about an agreement between labor, community, and project developers that was the result of authentic relationships that advance shared goals and reflect community priorities. So I'm here to speak about our efforts in the Department of Energy to strengthen responsible siting practices within our funding requirements using the Community Benefits Framework. Community Benefits Plan Framework. So I added this slide last night because one of the challenging things about being a federal representative is all of the acronyms, and this doesn't even cover it. Feel free to take a picture and reference this throughout the day. So we are in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, FECM. We work with the National Energy Technology Labs, NETL. I'll talk through each of these acronyms when I bring them up. What I want to be really clear about for the rest of this talk is these two bolded bullets on the right, community benefit plans, which are distinct from community benefit agreements. Community benefit plans are a requirement for federal funding that I'll be talking about ad nauseum for the rest of my time. And community benefit agreements are legally binding agreements between project developers and community organizations, that we hope are an outcome of these plans, but we'll talk more about that. All right, so let's get started. This presentation is really organized around two questions. The first is, what are community benefit plans? How are they implemented? I'll talk a little bit about the policy behind it, but I'm going to spend most of my time on what community benefit plans look like as a requirement for applications, the process for review, and how they're implemented. The second part addresses questions that we hear a lot, which is, how do we participate in the community benefit plan process? Where are opportunities to engage? Where do we find information? To be as transparent as possible, you'll see several QR codes in the corner of the slides. It might be just too much, but these will take you directly to the websites or documents that I reference, and if I miss something, please follow up with me afterwards and we'll try to get that to you. So let's touch on the policy behind the Department of Energy's novel community benefit plan framework. So many folks might have heard about the Justice 40 initiative, which has set the stage for community benefit plans. This initiative, established by the Biden administration's executive order, requires that 40% of overall benefits from federal funding are directed to disadvantaged communities. So one way that we are implementing this initiative in our offices and across the DOE's portfolio is through the community benefit plan frameworks, which is based on a set of 4 core policy priorities, which includes investing in America's workforce that seeks to strengthen the energy workforce in a way that creates high-quality jobs with the opportunities to organize and accessible workforce development opportunities. The second is engaging communities and labor with a goal of developing workforce and community benefit agreements, which will seek to ensure lasting commitments to these jobs and benefits. The third is advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility throughout the efforts, throughout the plan, from the engagement approaches to job accessibility and workforce opportunities and other economic opportunities associated with the project. And finally, implementing the Justice 40 initiative. So community benefit plans are a requirement to apply for all funding from Bill and IRA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. On the right here, you're not supposed to read this, but this is a screenshot of the front page of the community benefit plan template. This QR code will take you to that. It's available on the About Community Benefit Plan page, and the sections are really organized around those 4 core priority areas. In addition to addressing those 4 areas, applicants must conduct a detailed assessment of the potential impacts to communities and also demonstrate how they will incorporate feedback into their approach and project designs. So while this sets a framework that is intended to be flexible, to be adapted to different community contexts, to different technology types, each plan needs to have specific and measurable milestones per budget period. All right. Community benefit plans are scored in the merit review process alongside the technical and budget application materials. These plans typically represent 20% of the overall score of the application. So this means that the quality of the plans plays a substantial role in funding decisions. And these plans are reviewed by both internal experts and external experts who have subject matter expertise and practitioner experience in the elements of community benefit plans, community engagement, labor, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and environmental justice. And I just want to recognize that we probably have a lot of folks in the room with this exact type of expertise, and recommend submitting your application to be a reviewer of these plans. This is an opportunity to participate in the process and improve the quality of the community benefit plans. There is a time commitment to review and deliberate these plans, but it's important work, and these are paid roles and people will be compensated for their time. This code will take you to FECM's Fossil Energy Carbon Management's page, but you can also participate across the DOE in community benefit plan reviews. And lastly, community benefit plan progress is monitored and evaluated over the life of the project. How well applicants and project developers did in making progress across their commitments and their goals will influence and impact their ability to apply for future funding or continue to the next phase of the project. So what are we looking for as we evaluate these plans? And I'm not going to read all of these, but the strong plans that we're looking for move beyond a vision into actionable goals and outcomes. That the proposed activities are supported by adequate resources, including time, funding, and personnel with the skills and expertise to be successful in implementing the engagement activities. Strong plans are also reflective and aligned with the needs and priorities in the community that they're going to be cited, and include mechanisms for accountability to and transparency with impacted communities. They also demonstrate a process, there's just a lot here. They demonstrate a process to create high quality jobs, invest in workforce development, and ensure equitable access to jobs and other economic opportunities. So this is a new, as we implement this new requirement, they're not all winners. And sometimes applications fall short of the guidance. And to be fair, These are probably pretty common to folks who work in community engagement, and these aren't sourced from all of one plan or one section, but it's evident from across the DOE portfolio. These are some weaknesses that we identify, types of challenges noted during reviews. So a weak plan might not reflect an adequate understanding of the community context or the history in which it's cited, to understand how that might influence perception or concerns around a proposal, or a narrow focus of engagement efforts on certain types of stakeholders, elected officials or economic development organizations, which are important partners to be sure, but as we're talking about, expanding who's at the table and where the table is, this is important considerations with how we're thinking about the community engagement activities and proposals. And then finally, when commitments lack specificity and accountability, we want to see how these commitments will be enacted and potentially formalized in binding agreements, such as community benefit agreements and project labor agreements. Would you like me to adapt? Okay, perfect. I'll be quick but I just want to talk about how we address some of these weaknesses and our efforts to ensure and improve the quality of these community benefit plans. First, they're addressed at that project level, at that application level, before funding is even awarded. This flow chart here, we talked about the application phase, and if a project is selected to go to negotiations, the application reviews are discussed in detail with the federal project manager. This is an opportunity to address and correct some of those weaknesses and improve the plans. And then second, if the project is awarded, the team will undergo assistance and validation, which is oversight, which is a process to oversee the implementation and monitor community benefit plan progress. It includes 3 reviews throughout the project funding period. And at the program level, we're continuously working to improve the process and learn from conversations like we're having today, feedback from reviewers and applicants, to improve our guidance and training. This code will take you to our guidance, which you're welcome to see and read what we're recommending as guidance for developing these plans. So I just want to talk about the last bit, how to engage with the process and the projects. First, as I mentioned, you can apply to be a reviewer. This is a really important opportunity to contribute to the community benefit plan improvement and support rigorous plans as projects are proposed throughout the United States. Second, where do you go with project-specific questions? After projects are awarded, the information, you can engage with the project developer directly. So for the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, you can go to the National Energy Technology page where you can search the specific project. And after the award, there will be contact information as well as after the initial review process, a public version of the community benefits plan. And finally, more information about our office's efforts and engagement, reports from past workshops, and future opportunities to conduct engagement. In which that, please, I'd like to conclude. Sorry, that was a rapid fire community benefit plan 101. I'm available throughout the day. Here's my email. Please reach out and we'll try and answer your questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kelli. Please do send questions to Kelli. Take a picture of her email address. I think that it's important to note that a lot of the awarded funding is going to projects that really have not started yet. This is the time to engage So this is a time for the community engagement to happen. And so with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ugbaad Kosar. Thank you so much for coming. And I will have you give a brief introduction about yourself and then tell us a little bit about your work in community engagement.
I'd be happy to. Good morning, everyone. For full transparency, I found out I was doing this last night, so I'm going to kind of wing this. I like to be honest about this stuff. I'm filling in for someone that wasn't able to make it. So good morning. My name is Ugbaad Kosar. I didn't know I'd have a slide, so that's wonderful. Thank you. And I'm the Director of Environmental Justice at Carbon 180. So I want to just briefly introduce myself. I'm probably a new face for a lot of folks in the room, and anytime someone's giving me information, candidly, the first thing I ask is, who is this person? Why are they presenting it this way? What biases do they bring to the table? And what kind of information should I take away from it? So I want to put a lot of things up front. I work at Carbon 180, which is a climate-focused NGO. We are based in DC, and we work on carbon removal. So we're really interested in thinking about how to scale up carbon removal from a really equitable, just, and high accountability standpoint. I was going to go into the differentiation of CDR and CCS, but that's been a theme, which I really appreciate. But just really want to emphasize our work on carbon removal. The second thing I want to just share is, when I first got into the climate space, I came from a forestry and a forest sciences background. So that's really what sort of drew me to the climate crisis, climate change. I was really interested in the role that forests and reforestation can play in drawing carbon down and storing it, as well as a lot of the sort of co-benefits that come with this. And then as I was in grad school, the more I learned about it, the more I started to get a little nervous about the pressures that are put on our land systems and the pressures that forests and soils and agriculture are facing in being able to draw down carbon, because they're also impacted by climate change. And that really sort of got me into this idea of what else is out there, how else are folks thinking about this. It just so happened to be when the big climate report by the IPCC, another acronym, I'm sorry, came out and talked about the role of carbon removal. So that's how I started getting interested in the role of technology and technological carbon removal and direct air capture and carbon storage. Really started getting my mind around what I first thought of as truthfully very sci-fi and scary, but I was interested, and I started learning about a lot more, and that's how I ended up at Carbon 180. So my first bias is that I believe that I need some amounts of carbon removal to meet the climate crisis. What that looks like, what forms, how we're going to do it is really up in the air, and that's really what I spend my days trying to figure out. The second is, I think we're going to need some amounts of natural or forests and soils, and some amounts of the technology to meet just the crisis that we're facing today. Again, what that looks like is really up in the air, but that's sort of where I've landed from learning and researching and understanding. But my third bias, I'm incredibly fearful of extractive industries co-opting carbon removal. I come from it from a climate standpoint. I come from it from an understanding that we need it. Frankly, my family is from East Africa, and the climate crisis is there today, and it was there yesterday, and it was there 10 years ago. So how are we thinking about addressing the mess that we've already put up in the atmosphere is something that really keeps me up at night. And it is concerning when I hear the idea, I think someone brought up a quote of continuing fossil fuel, the life cycle or lifestyle or whatever, fossil fuels. That's concerning to me. So I just want to put it all out there as I sort of introduce the work that we are doing today. I was asked to talk a little bit about a report that we came out with early January, which is called Recommendations for Building an Environmentally Just Carbon Removal Industry. The background behind this was XPRIZE, for folks that may not be familiar, is another nonprofit, and they received, their whole idea is to do big prize programs, right? They really want to spur early innovation, really reward sort of early startups who are thinking about doing things that are kind of high risk, or folks aren't interested, or they're really, really early stage. So they had one for carbon dioxide removal projects. It was $100 million, and they wanted to reward these early startups, but they had a lot of ideas on how to thinking about technical feasibility and thinking about resource needs and energy needs and how to assess all of that. But they were really interested in how do we think about the environmental justice perspective of this. We're hitting early startups, so they haven't even broken ground on anything. They're really 10 folks in a lab in some cases. So how do we get them to start thinking about this early on? They reached out to us, and we thought, what if we, as a part of the application process, provide some resources on what environmental justice is, some seminal reports, give them a broad understanding, and then ask them where they're at, right? Just like give them the opportunity to talk through what their understanding is and how they've already, if they have, been thinking about environmental justice in the work. Surprise, surprise. The report was very similar to the previous slide of there was not a lot of familiarity, truthfully. There was a couple that were really, really thinking far ahead in terms of the operations of their work, and as they were able to scale up, here's how we're thinking about engagement, here's how we're thinking about co-benefits, here's how we're thinking about managing risk, et cetera, et cetera. But the vast majority of startups really did not know what they were talking about, to be completely honest with you. And that is incredibly important. We talk about education all the time, about how to educate community members and community leaders. Well, we need to also educate the startups and the industry as well, and understanding how to adjust their operations and thinking about how they want to do the work that they're saying that they want to do. So what did we do with this information? Once we analyzed it, we put together a committee of EJ advocates, and we came up with some recommendations for the startups to start thinking about environmental justice, and also provided recommendations for XPRIZE to ensure that as they're assessing the technical feasibility, or they're assessing all these other components, that they're also putting weight behind assessing environmental justice. So it's equally as important to be able to actually get the funds that they're applying for. And the way that we did it was sort of broken down into 3 categories or facets of justice. So there's procedural, there was distributive, and then there was reparative. When you think of procedural justice, we think of fairness in decision making. How are decisions being made? Who's involved in the process? We talk about this table a lot yesterday and today. That's really at the center of it, right? It's power dynamics and how we're managing that. So we talked about how you need to approach community engagement as a process of co-learning and two-way learning. Really ensuring that you're developing strategies for reaching communities directly, and not using proxies, but actually speaking to the folks that are going to be impacted by these projects. And then also making sure that no matter what you're doing, you're developing community engagement as a continuous process throughout the life cycle of a project, from before it happens, as it's happening, even project closure. All these things need to be continuously discussed. So a couple of things that we put together there. In terms of the distributive, that's sort of the equitable distribution of resources, benefits, risks, and how those are identified, how those are raised, and then how those are spread out amongst all the people that are going to be impacted by a project. So again, one of the things we really pushed on is being transparent about the potential risks of a project. I've heard a lot about presentations that are made that are kind of PR. Like, you'll have an industry come and they'll be like, oh, here are all the really wonderful things about our project, and here's why we really want to do what we're doing, and et cetera, et cetera. And that actually just breeds more distrust. It breeds more anxiousness about projects from what we've heard. And so what's incredibly important is being upfront about, here's what we know about the project, here's what we don't know, here's the potential risks, here's where it's happened in the past, here's what we've been thinking about how to mitigate it, and most importantly, here's an open space for you to identify project risks and for you to tell us what's coming up for you and what your experience was as well. Creating customized workforce development plan, that was incredibly important because the one benefit that came up all the time was jobs from these startups. That's sort of the first thing they came up with. And yes, jobs are incredibly important. I mean, everyone wants to be able to have a good, well-paying job, protected, living wages. I mean, that's incredibly important. But it's not the be-all, end-all for naming a co-benefit of a project. So we really wanted to be explicit of, here's how you do it, but there is a lot of work in thinking about, outside of jobs, what else are you thinking about for your project? And the last thing was putting formal agreements into place to actually codify these agreed upon benefits. I mean, it's one thing to have discussions. It's another thing to have sort of legally binding documents that ties what you've promised to communities in a way that they can hold you accountable. And then the final sort of category or facet of justice we thought about was reparative. We can't come in thinking we're starting with a clean slate. There's cumulative impacts of what we're doing. There are legacies of harm in many of these communities. And so you can't come in with sort of blind eyes of like, well, my project doesn't do this, but it's going to be connected to other things that exist. So how are you discussing that? How have you thought about that? Understanding past injustices and harms that community has faced, and designing projects to really prioritize repairing those past harms, and then be honest if you can't do it. I mean, I'm not here to say that carbon removal is here to save the world. Frankly, we have to be honest with what it can and can't do, and then provide people the opportunity to come to the decisions of, is this something that fits with what we are trying to address here today? I think I hit the time mark, so I'm gonna wrap up there. But thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And we have one more person we're going to hear from before we end this morning plenary session, and then I will come back up here and give us further instructions. But I'd like to welcome Paige Powell from Commission Shift.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have slides. Thanks, y'all. I just want to make a note about this photo. That's a really happy photo, and if I had been asked to submit a picture, that's not the one I would have submitted, because that is not my carbon management face. This is my carbon management face. This is my face, because what I think about when I think about carbon management is mass casualty events. How many people are going to die because of these pipelines and ruptures? I think about publicly funded subsidies to fossil fuel companies to put more dangerous infrastructure in already overburdened and under-resourced communities. And I think about risks to groundwater in an era of increasing water scarcity. So that is not my carbon management face, I just wanted to clarify. The Department of Energy a couple of months ago asked for comments on their responsible carbon management plan. And originally I wasn't going to submit anything because DOE is not a regulatory agency, but they do hold the purse, right? They're giving out a lot of money, as they said, about $20 billion for CCS projects. And she who holds the purse holds the power. So at some point I got really upset and wrote a rage blog about it, and that turned into this. So I've got 15 policy proposals for public health, safety, and accountability. And if you haven't heard of Commission Shift, we are a Texas statewide nonprofit organization reforming oil and gas oversight by building public support to hold the Railroad Commission of Texas, the state's oil and gas agency, accountable to its mission in a shifting energy landscape. And as we've heard, this has all come down because of the money from the IIJA and the IRA. And frankly, there's no strong regulatory framework in place to ensure that these projects are implemented in a safe and equitable way. So that's what this is about. And these are intended to be very high level, not very technical, so that they're easily accessible by communities and everyone can advocate for these sorts of policies in their communities. And I just wanted to mention that, we haven't talked anything about, we spoke about hydrogen a little bit, but ammonia, LNG, methanol, ethanol, bioenergy, BECCS, all of these are associated CCS projects. And so, it's a bigger sort of portfolio of industry than you would think. So the first one is primacy. We've been hearing a lot about primacy. The EPA is trying to grant or gifting sort of primary permitting authority to states to issue permits in a faster method and in a faster timeline. And I think the reasoning I put here that we believe that states should not have primacy is because of the interjurisdictional nature of some geologic storage formations. Along the Gulf Coast, we've been hearing a lot about the saline formation, and it crosses the border between Texas and Louisiana. So you're gonna have Louisiana industry injecting on their side, overseen by the LDNR. And then you're gonna have Texas industry injecting on their side, and you're gonna have competing pressure plumes within this same sort of formation. And who's managing that? Who's coordinating that, across those agencies and across states? So that's kind of a primary reason, but also we believe that, a lot of the states, Texas in particular, has what we call reluctant regulators, that the TCEQ and the RRC have not necessarily been very good stewards of their current obligations. We see the orphan well list not getting any smaller year after year. We see induced seismicity and more infrequent earthquakes in West Texas over and over again because of our current Class 2 injection programs. So until these institutional issues are managed, we don't believe that state agencies deserve any more authority for more UIC programs. And frankly, there's no consistent accounting methodology, right? All of this is coming down from the IRA, and they're offering major tax breaks to companies, but there's really nobody saying, oh yeah, that CO2 is staying in the ground. It's not leaking along the pipe. It's not coming up through other fissures or different avenues of escape. And so I think that federal and state agencies, I'm talking about EPA, IRS, DOE, PHMSA, and there's a whole other list of them. I think Department of the Interior is involved here in some way as well. All of them need to coordinate on a consistent methodology to ensure that this CO2 is well accounted for and that the taxpayer subsidies are not being squandered. Environmental improvements, I think it's really important. Everybody's talking about how Class 6 regulations are much more stringent and you have to plug all of the wells in the area of review, and that's really fantastic. I would like to see that for our Class 2 program as well. But frankly, we really want to see site-specific environmental investments to offset the harm of these industrial expansions. And that could look like reforestation or grassland, what do we call it? Pocket prairies and that sort of thing. Nature-based carbon removal solutions are like the original, most efficient way to go. And so it would make sense that a portion of these monies would go to remediate existing industry harms. And certainly this last one, any orphan and abandoned wells within the vicinity must be plugged, inspected, and monitored. Capture co-pollutants. So I think hopefully everybody in this room knows that air pollution is not just a respiratory condition. It affects your physical, mental, and behavioral health. It can result in lost wages and productivity and other economic costs. And so we think that all of these CO2 removal projects need to include benefits for co-pollutant removal, including ultrafine particulate, ozone, NOx, SOx, VOCs, and other hazardous air pollutants. And before anybody catches me on this, yes, I'm aware that ozone is not a primary pollutant, it's a secondary pollutant, which is formed by VOCs or NOx interacting with sunlight. But as the Clean Air Task Force representative said yesterday, the amines from carbon capture produce VOCs, which can be carcinogens and neurotoxins, and obviously react with sunlight and create ozone. So are we capturing those VOCs? Are we making sure that any ozone created is being captured? Because we don't want to see more air pollution as a result of this solution. We need to restrict utilization. No federally funded projects can use CO2 for EOR. I think that makes sense. This is completely counter to meeting our nation's climate goals. If you live in Texas, you know that EOR is king. We're getting all of the last resources out of and Oxy's CEO, Vicki Holub, has repeatedly said they plan to CO2 flood all of their conventional resources. I sure hope that the money that Oxy's getting for their DAC hub and everything else doesn't go for EOR. We want to ensure permanence. Maybe somebody can correct me on this. I hope that I'm wrong, but I believe that there are no rules ensuring that CO2, once sequestered, must stay in the ground and cannot be removed at a later date for industrial use or CO2 EOR. So once it's in there, it needs to stay in there, and I'd like to see some rules about that. Long-term monitoring. So IPCC standard says that we need to sequester 99% of the CO2 for 1,000 years to make sure that it stays in the ground because of the 4 different types of trapping mechanisms of CO2 sequestration over time, that this is the standard. And what I've been hearing is that 50-year monitoring period after post-injection site closure. 50 years is a really good start, but what happens when there's an earthquake after that? Or what happens when in 100 years somebody else comes and drills? So I'd really like to see a longer term monitoring. I know 1,000 years is really kind of unfathomable, but let's start by moving it to 100, right? If you were to ask Exxon or Oxy, do they plan to be in business in 100 years? I think they're going to say yes. So they should be reliable and monitoring their wells for that period of time. Sufficient financial liability. So this, I think, there are probably some modern financial structures, self-sustaining financial structures in place to ensure that there is financial liability to cover the costs of disaster prevention, mitigation, and full remediation when problems occur. Right now at the state, we have a CO2 trust fund that if and when it's found insufficient to cover the costs of these programs, does not need to cover the programs. So when the money runs out, oops, we don't have to monitor anymore. That's not acceptable. We need to have full liability. I need to go because I have 50 seconds. We need to fund local emergency response programs. In Satarsha, they didn't even know that there was a pipeline. The emergency responders didn't know. We need to have vehicles that can run without oxygen, right? So we don't have them shut down. We need to have go bags for communities so that they can escape in times of need. Pipeline safety. FEMSA doesn't have full and complete rules for safety for CO2 in all of its phases, and they're developing that in the next year. But we would like to see a moratorium on new CO2 pipeline permits until new safety rules are promulgated. And repurposing of old infrastructure. It's been said that old pipelines should not be converted to CO2 because they weren't built to spec, and that it would be safer to build, and furthermore, that class 2 injection wells should not be converted to class 6 wells. I really need to go because I'm out of time. EJ is super important, and we need to consider that these projects are going to be bringing more hazardous infrastructure to communities, and it's going to further perpetuate environmental injustice. And language access. I really want to thank the organizers of this event for providing translation, but I did not see any Spanish flyer or a Spanish website or outreach to Spanish communities. So I'd be very surprised if there are any people making use of that. And so when we talk about language access, that doesn't mean just having them in the room, but really doing that outreach. And free, prior, and informed consent means, you really need to have accurate information of both the benefits and the risks. I appreciate what we're doing here. Lastly, community benefits agreements should not be used to increase pollution levels in the community. There are things like free health clinics. There are, like I said, nature-based solutions, all sorts of things that can really help. So that's an overview. Thank you for your time.